Welcome to Power Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking politics. We're going to deviate from our normal course of action where we hit the big news of the day. Yeah, this is a surprise to you.
Okay.
I just shifted course
Yes.
like an audible. We're going to talk about the border, in particular why the border is such a potent political issue. We're going to cover the transition of politics in this country from about the 1980s to the present, going back a little bit further in some cases, to talk about why the border became such a pertinent issue. This is critical because we're in Texas. This is an epicenter for where the politics of the border are. So it's, I think, useful for us to tease this out as a story about the way this has evolved over time and kind of where it's going, which is something you're an expert in. But I want to set the stage for us here because I'm really interested in the way that this issue has migrated from a kind of minor issue to something that is now obviously of national importance and political potency. In the year 2005, we had 3 governors assemble in Texas. It sounds like a beginning of a joke, right? Rick Perry, obviously the governor of Texas, Bill Richardson from New Mexico, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's governor of California. Not a joke. In case people didn't know, that's a true thing that happened. They came to Texas basically to partner together, since they all had a contiguous border along their state's southern areas, to oppose mistreatment of migrants, both documented and undocumented, and pledge to take responsibility for border security. Boy, have things changed, right? The politics of the border became so much more potent. You had a transition in terms of the politics, obviously, with the Obama administration. And the border then became a flashpoint for all of these states, especially in Texas. So just to set the stage for the way that this came about, what's your kind of initial take on why it is that the border became such a potent political issue?
Well, I think the border has been a potent political issue since forever. President Wilson was the first president sending military during the Mexican Revolution back in the 1920s. The border has always been contentious, but more deeply, I think, is because borders represent the division between us and them. And borders also represent the definition of the sovereignty of a state. And borders are very potent because states have, in every single country, every sovereign country has the right to determine who enters, how they enter, and if they can settle down and eventually become part of the polity.
Yeah, kind of the co-integration of the of new population to the existing population.
So it's something that is in the very own essence of how you define a nation state today.
Interesting, yeah.
And migration also, since we have recorded human history, migration has been part of human history.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's that part in terms of how, I guess, from a substantive point or substantial point, I think that's why it's very interesting. But in terms of politics, because migration sells.
Yeah, it sells. But I wonder about this, and that's the notion that the kind of people who are already here, who have then, new migrants come in, are worried about the existing in-group sort of domination.
Correct.
Right? It's a story about the economy. It's a story about kind of race. And the concern is that it becomes very quickly a kind of dog whistle, right? Where you've got kind of one party, or maybe in some cases actually both parties. It's not just a Republican thing. It's definitely the Democrats as well, especially because it's been historically so potent. But that's been the case that the in-group has always been uncomfortable with the new out-group. So then you have things like, the economy is sort of suffering because of this new migration.
Right.
Or you've got, kind of difficulty in integration or crime issues that are resulting from this new group. So that too seems to have important implications to the way that people feel about immigration.
Of course.
But what's odd to me, I want to ask you this question, and that's that, immigration is so important to the economy. Everyone sort of recognizes this in some way, and yet there's still this resistance to immigration, especially in kind of peak moments, right? So when the economy goes bad, there's this sort of sense that needs to be someone to blame, and people blame immigration, which is usually not true, right? Usually immigration is a driver of sort of economic success, especially in places that need labor like Texas. So how do you square those things together?
Well, it's very difficult to square them, and just going back a couple of centuries.
Wow, okay. I'm just going to
the differences between the in-group and the out-group has always been present. We saw these with, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1800s, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan. Then you have anti-immigrant sentiment with Southern Europeans, Italians, even with the Irish that are very similar to the in-group in terms of demographic characteristics, but they were shown upon because they were Catholic. So every time you have that pull and push tension between the in-group and the out-group, because they're different, because there is something different about those coming home. In terms of immigration, is very tricky, and I think the economic impacts, because people simply do not understand one way or the other what are the economic benefits and costs of migration. Of course, immigration costs, right? And immigration is going to have an impact perhaps at the local level in terms of some costs that some municipalities may not be able to cover, especially when you have a huge influx, but it has to be a huge influx. Then at the state level, I would think that immigration has a positive net effect. And at the national level, that positive effect tends to multiply. So the question is, in which industries migrants tend to be more represented? And you have obviously construction industry, agricultural industry, farming, so on and so forth. And that has a net positive effect. We have seen in the history of the country, and more recently back in 2016, back in 2006, that when you're trying to replace migrant labor with native-born labor, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work,
It's like, no way. That's it. And it's something very complicated to replace. Wages, it's very, very hard labor. And it's not that you're talking about unskilled migration. You're talking about a different skill that the native-born population does not want to do. Picking strawberries or oranges or olives or farming, it's very, very, very hard labor. And there is not enough supply of native-born labor. So once you create those conditions, you need migrant labor.
Good.
That's it. You need it.
And you saw this transition really potent in the kind of time of COVID. So polling in Texas suggests that between, say, February of 2018 and April of 2022, that between 59% and 67% of Texas Republicans says that the U.S. allows too many migrants to come in. So there's a sort of nativist attachment to this, which is obviously connected to it. But this is not just a Republican thing. Democrats have run on this issue as well, right? In fact, if you look at the way that even Beto O'Rourke, right, ran his Senate race, which people suggested was sort of too left-leaning. When he first got on the scene, he criticized the Biden administration, saying that they should do a better job on the border. They need to kind of trim things and make sure that it's a priority, and they frankly weren't doing it. He made the case that there needs to be predictability. There needs to be some order that transpires, because that's not what's happening right now. He may have shifted a little bit in his expectations after he ran for president, but we also saw the same thing happen in the Senate race in 2024, where Colin Allred called out Joe Biden, saying that you're doing a bad job on the border. So here it is, the Democrats effectively running a kind of moderate campaign against the way that the Biden administration is running things. Is there a recipe here where Democrats can gain politically from making these kinds of claims, or is this really a Republican-led effort that is going to be forever potent for their voters?
I think it's more Republican-led, and the problem here is that you talk about immigration, but you never talk about the solutions to have a more predictable system. immigration policy in this country is completely broken. Both Democrats and Republicans agree for different reasons. But the system does not work.
And that doesn't work because the border itself is too porous, and or that the immigration sort of legal system, the judges and the process for doing things is inefficient as well. Like, what's the kind of cornerstone of the problem?
Well, I think because the status quo helps both Democrats and Republicans and also business owners or the industry in general.
So no one has a real incentive to change it.
There's no incentive to change it. But again, if you want to diminish it, if you want to decrease it, or if you want to have it, you need to have a guest worker program that is really efficient.
Interesting,
That is something that works.
The nation has tried this before, and it's kind of gone away from that. Is this something that you think could return?
I think that we really need to start thinking about it in such a way. Why? Because this whole crisis started in the 1980s where circular migration stopped.
Okay.
So when you have circular migration, that's what it is.
I see.
You have seasonal workers coming here, working here, moving through, for example, the agricultural cycle all over the States, then going back to the countries of origin. Mainly it was Mexico. So you have that circularity that you have people coming to work and then say, thank you very much. I made my money for this year. I'll see you next year. Bye-bye. So you have a revolving door. Once you shut the door, the cost of going back are huge. And you're not going to do it because it's harder to come back and it's harder to come in. So you stay here. So what you need to do is to be more efficient in terms of how you do that, because we have a labor need. That is out of the question, and you cannot negate that. So when you make it an efficient system, right, and you have, for example, a market futures, and you give these laborers or migrants a contract for, let's say, 10 years. You have your contract for 10 years. You as an employer, you're not worried about, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if they get deported? Do I need to train them again or anything like that? You train them once, and you know that for the next 9 years, they're going to come back. You provide whatever healthcare or whatnot, a 401k or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, even Social Security. So those contributions can really go into Social Security. And then they're going to come here, they're going to make their money, and they're going to go back. And that also creates some sort of wealth back in countries of origin and help those countries of origin. But
unlikely, right? Politically, it's been such a fraught issue. And I think one of the reasons it's so fraught is that it really did define the kind of state versus federal government political conflict that we see rising in the 1980s, right?
Correct.
President Reagan institutes this sort of mindset for Republicans that the government is the enemy, right?
Correct.
So he tries to kind of dismantle things and has some success doing it. But the states really pick up the mantle and say, well, if the federal government's not going to change this, then we're going to do something about it. To me, the core of the conflict is basically borders, bailouts, and Band-Aids, right? The border is a huge issue. Bailouts became a big issue during the Bush administration, and to some degree during the Biden administration, and then Band-Aids. Obamacare and the role of the federal government in providing health care and health insurance for people. It has become a real just kind of conflict at its core. So I think that has become the difficulty of making there be an accommodation between kind of what the states need, what the economy needs, and what the federal government needs.
Yeah, but here the problem with that is that if you allow states, as we currently are in this political dilemma between who has the national prerogative to have immigration under control. This is not healthcare that you can, say to states, you can or cannot accept Medicaid
it's
expansion.
like incentives, but it's not that.
No, you have to have something that is going to be consistent across the nation, because if not, you're going to end up with a patchwork immigration policy. Texas is going to have one, Illinois is going to have one, so on and so forth. And that would be a complete disaster, because once again, this is not about healthcare. This is about how the state as a sovereign nation determines who is willing or who is able to come in and stay and be part of the polity. So I think that's also a key notion, but obviously is not as politically doesn't
possible, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
hard to get. And part of the reason it's hard to get is that the border has become such a salient issue for Republicans that they're really become intractable about making changes. So definitely, with the exception of the COVID moment where that was the most important issue, the border has been the most important issue for Republicans in Texas. April of 23 polling had basically 57% of GOP voters saying immigration and the border is the most important problem. So it's hard to dislodge that. It's been this way for a long time. And part of it, of course, is reinforced by politicians who are saying there's a crisis,
Correct.
right? And the way you kind of conceptualize it, the way it's visualized is so potent, right? You've got
Absolutely.
sort of like often just like incorrect or misleading images of people kind of traveling over borders or through rivers or stuff. Like there's just a lot of visuals that make people really worried about what's happening. So like you said earlier, this is a kind of nativist response to a lot of what's going on, but also, really hits people kind of where they see it as a problem.
And the other way, to counteract that, it would be thinking about, especially let's think about construction, for instance.
Yeah.
So migrant labor plays a very important part in housing development and construction.
Yeah.
So the question is, okay, migrant labor, let's say you can buy a house for $200,000.
Yeah.
Non-migrant labor
in Fantasyland.
Right. Well, but whatever it is,
Right.
let's say the median price $350.
Yeah.
All right.
Not anymore.
Non-migrant labor
Right.
is going to go to $500,000.
Yeah.
And that's it, because the native-born force is not willing to work at that wage price.
Let me ask you about like the preferences for restrictive policies on immigration. So it's one thing to have kind of people who say immigration's a big problem and, there are too many people who are coming here and it's a problem. But it's another thing to have kind of real kind of punitive notions about what to do about it. So for instance, in 2016, 63% of Texans opposed the comprehensive immigration reform. You had in 2017, 80% of Republicans say they oppose sanctuary cities, the sort of option of having people come there and be protected from deportation effectively. In 2018, a plurality, 46% supported separation of children from their parents when families were apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border. These are pretty punitive type policies. And I'm wondering kind of how you get from the point where people say immigration's a big issue, it has to be changed, to being really hard on people who have come here.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's a matter of how you communicate the issue. In terms of sanctuary cities, it's not a sanctuary city. If you commit a crime, whether you are in LA or in Houston, you're going to be punished. After that, then you're going to be deported one way or the other. So it's a matter of how you construct the narrative around it. And it creates fear because it's unknown. You don't know. It's something that is going to have important implications for that. But I think eventually is how you really take control of that narrative. Obviously, comprehensive immigration reform is absolutely impossible. It's not going to happen. Forget about it.
So I want to ask you about this. The Senate tried in a bipartisan fashion in 2018 to put together an immigration package that would have been sort of, address some of the issues that we've been talking about. It effectively got killed. It was attempted to be kind of reinvigorated, but the sort of national forces sort of objected. So Donald Trump in particular said, I don't want that to pass, not for us. And then, the efforts sort of went to zero. So what was in this plan? And do you think that that's the kind of thing that might eventually sell in a world where you do have a kind of sense that immigration is important, but we have to control the border?
Immigration is a cross-cutting issue. So if you do not...
Across party lines.
Well, across party lines and across policy issues. It affects healthcare. It affects education. It affects a lot of things. So to come here, it's extremely complicated. It's very, 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 very complicated. And you have to be very determined to follow the whole rules. It takes, when you arrive or whatnot, maybe 16 to 20 years to be able to become a naturalized citizen, if you're lucky, one way or the other. But the system is completely broken, so you cannot fix the whole thing on one city.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So what I would say is that you need to find issues in which Republicans and Democrats agree and start fixing that.
Yeah.
You need to solve also the immigration court system that everyone agrees.
Yeah.
So you still need to fix those little parts and then focus on the other parts that they might not be a lot of agreement, but you can achieve an agreement.
Yeah.
Securing the border, that's once again a prerogative that every nation state has, and every nation state takes it very seriously. So it's very clear how you secure it the 11,000 different ways, technology, this and that, et cetera, et cetera. So
that's easy enough because that's just money, right? Like you can spend money on something, but like getting consensus on how to fix the legal arrangement for what to do, and then just to have the agreement that like we're all going to sort of fix this together is another. So it just takes a lot of effort and political kind of capital to make it happen. And like you say, the kind of incentives that keep things sort of as they are, right? Republicans have got a good talking point. Democrats are able to sort of, say that the Republicans aren't doing enough, but everyone's winning economically more or less. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Because obviously if you are an employer and you're hiring undocumented migrant laborers, workers, it's
right, which is illegal, right? So
it is
how
illegal.
are people getting away with this?
Well, but I mean, they don't ask. It's a don't ask, don't tell type of situation.
Right.
If you implement E-Verify, then that's a different question.
Right. Which the state of Texas has attempted, but has never followed through on because of this issue, right?
Right.
Yeah. If you start asking questions, then it means that you're liable for the answer.
Yes.
That's not a good thing for them. Yeah.
And then it's going to be raising eyebrows and say like, now I don't have any more workers.
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
Yeah, good point. Okay, yeah. I want to ask you about the kind of Latino vote in this, right? I remember in 2016 thinking that there's no way this is going to be an argument that sells along the Texas border. But it turns out that it kind of has, right?
Yeah.
Part of the reason is that some of the scholarship on this suggests that a lot of people who are like in these arrangements, like Latino voters in particular, don't think of their identity as being Hispanic.
Correct.
They think of themselves as Americans, or they think of themselves as Anglo. That's interesting because then the notion of kind of priming them on the kind of more problematic elements of the policy, which may be more nativist and more restrictive, aren't going to work, right?
Yeah.
And we always sort of assume that they would, and Democrats I think assume that they would. So what do you think about that? Like, how does that play into the nature of the way that the Latino vote's going to shift politically because of these issues?
So that's a big misconception.
Yeah.
Since the 1940s. Latinos and in that time, the majority of Latinos, Mexican Americans, were not across the board in favor, of, for example, of the Bracero program. To the contrary, they were saying, no, they're taking jobs away from us. And then that's the other important part that is a political socialization issue in terms of being recognized as member of the polity and then someone coming in and mainstream thinking, oh, you are with them is no. I'm playing on this side. I'm from your team. So it may be a reaction of signaling the mainstream. I'm as American or more American than you are. And I'm part and rooting for this team.
Interesting.
So that's one issue. And the other issue, especially when you think at the border, is CBP, that is the Customs and Border Protection, employs a lot of people in the region. So there's also an economic interest.
Gotcha.
So it's clear, but Latino voters do not 100% blank check in favor of immigration. There is a lot of variation, and political parties, in some cases, in this case, Democrats have understood, oh, you're Latino, you're for immigration. And it's like, no.
Not quite,
Nope.
Yeah, and the whole thing has really made Texas politics like national politics. And I've said this for a long time. The kind of spirit of Texas politics has really changed since this issue became a predominant issue. It was bound to be something. Maybe it was going to be abortion, obviously the economy. But this is a uniquely kind of Texas issue. And it's transitioned the entire state apparatus into this kind of political, hot potato. So governors like Perry and Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Ken Paxton to some degree, like all of this sort of, statewide Republican leaders have spent a lot of time campaigning on basically what's a national issue, but it's obviously Texas focused.
Yeah, and this is a huge change from previous immigration law, in the sense that when immigration law at the national government started to be very strict, there was these provisions it was called the Texas Proviso.
Interesting, yeah.
And the Texas Proviso said, like, you're going to apply all these law here, but not in Texas, basically.
Yeah, they got to carve out.
Exactly. And carve out is like, if ain't broken, I'm going to fix it. Like, we're just going to look blind eye and just keep pushing forward.
How does this come about? This is sort of from the power of the leaders who were many Texans in that era.
And the role that immigration play in building the state of Texas, especially the agricultural sector.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and it's become such a hot potato for the Republicans, and they've used this to leverage into national kind of politics, right?
Absolutely.
And I think kind of being attentive to these issues politically is good for them. It lets them raise money. It gives them a high profile. And even though we don't have as many Texans as sort of national government as we did in the 1950s and 60s, it's about to come around again because you know that this issue is not going to go away.
No, it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
But that's another issue that we might explain in a different week or program. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The party keeps up next time.